The microbiome is such an interesting space. And as you said, really, this is 5 to 10 years of, clinical research and bench research, and how we use this in clinical practice is all over the map. But there are so many things that we can now say that we are pretty sure are happening in the gut. And you do such a great job in this book of laying out a lot of these things. But let's just lay the groundwork here and say, like, for people that don't know anything about the microbiome, like what is this thing called the microbiome? We'll get into how it affects women specifically in midlife. But let's just start with, man, what the heck are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, we are more microorganisms than we are human. And so it's trillions of bacteria, protozoa, viruses, fungi that are part of what make us who we are. And it's not just the gut, it's the oral microbiome, it's the vaginal microbiome, it's the lung microbiome, it's the bone microbiome. Like literally every body system has its own microbiome, the skin microbiome. But when we're talking specifically about what is changing for women, as we are navigating this perimenopause to menopause transition, it's the understanding that in the gut, literally every single body system, it determines when we go into menopause. It determines whether or not we have a healthy immune system or a healthy bones, or has the trauma we experienced as young adults and children, does that impact the microbiome? Yes, it does. And so I make the argument that the microbiome is really the key to longevity, and that the more we can understand about why it's important, what we need to do to support it, what are the things that are impacting it negatively, hint, hint, a lot of our modern day lifestyle in many ways, but the message is not that we can't fix it. We absolutely can. It's very malleable, but helping people understand the gut microbiome is part of our digestive system. It is, when I say the word malleable, it means, the choices that we make day to day do have a large impact. But what I found really interesting, Doug, when I was doing research for the book, was understanding all these connections, these axes between different body systems. When I really understood ovarian aging or immunosenescence, when I started to understand these very big concepts, I was like, wow, this is really fascinating that the ovaries are communicating with the gut, and the ovaries are what set the pacemaker of aging for us as women. And if there are things we know are accelerate or decelerate aging, it's like, why aren't we talking more about this? Because I find this uniquely fascinating. And maybe listeners don't know, but we are born as women. We are born with a finite amount of eggs. Whatever we have is what we're born with. And slowly over time, from puberty to up until menopause, we hopefully release an egg every month. It plus or minus gets fertilized or doesn't, or plus or minus gets reovulate or not. And a lot of women don't. Over the course of a lifetime, we start with a couple million. We probably have 300 to 400 at the time of menopause. So we still have eggs, but we're no longer ovulating, obviously no longer able to get pregnant without significant technology. So as I was writing this book, a lot of things came to me about like testing, like why am I seeing consistent results on women of a certain age group? Why am I seeing more inflammation? Why am I seeing alterations in keystone bacteria? Why am I seeing blunted short chain fatty acid production? Why are short chain fatty acids important? How does the impact of someone's trauma or high ACE scores influence when they go into menopause? And so I very humbly sit back and I just, being the nerd that I am, I was like, I'm seeing all these connections. I think this is really important. And I don't see anyone else really putting all these things together. So the book is really a nice way of kind of walking through the physiology of the body as we're aging, and then also providing a lot of solutions. So I think that's the most important thing to stress is on the other side are lifestyle strategies, supplements, medications, things that we can do, diagnostic testing.
I'm going to get into solutions for sure. Before we do, a couple of the things, you mentioned some really important things in here. The immune system, for one. So a lot of people don't understand. I mean, most people don't understand where the immune system is. Like what is it, right? Like there's no immune organ really. So like, what is the immune system? But you could actually argue, I think that the gut actually probably is, if there is an immune organ, like it probably is the gut. So how is the immune system related to the gut? Why it is that then the gut kind of uses the immune system to communicate over the body? So what's this interaction like?
Yeah. So about 70 to 80% of our immune system is contained in the microbiome. So when I talk about it being so critically important, what I think many people don't know is that these very important hormones, estradiol in particular, that's where the bulk of the research is really the best communicator with the immune system. So there's all this interface. When we're looking at the small intestinal lining, literally it's the small intestinal lining, which is one cell layer thick, and on the other side of that is the immune system. So if you breach the small intestinal lining, which we refer to as leaky gut or small intestinal hyperpermeability, immune system's right on the other side, so it can get provoked very easily. The other thing that I think is so interesting is we have two different kind of major thoughts about the immune system. There is a less sophisticated, I don't want to say not important, less sophisticated, not as targeted immune system, and that's kind of the frontline soldiers of the immune system. And then we have another layer of the immune system that is more sophisticated, has a lot of special machinery that's designed to create memory cells and to get very specific when we're fighting off a virus. And understanding that as we are navigating this transitional period in our lives, as estrogen is fluctuating, it can trigger more inflammation. It can trigger inappropriate overactivation of the immune system. It can flip-flop things. Women are 4 to 5 times more likely to develop autoimmune conditions in menopause. And frankly, most of us have already developed at least one or two beforehand. And once you have one, we're more likely to have others. So this kind of potent hormone, estradiol, is the glue for the immune system. And it's the glue for the gut microbiome. It's the glue for so many things in the body. And so I always kind of use the analogy of, we have the frontline soldiers that go out. There it's not as specific, but it is a target attack. Even thinking about your skin, your mucous membranes, tears are all examples of this kind of very basic immune system. And then we have the other immune system that is, very potent, very powerful, but is designed to be very targeted. Those are the antibodies. And we use that terminology, thinking about it that way: T cells, B cells, memory cells. That is a much more sophisticated aspect. But what's amazing about this transitional period is we go from having a much more robust immune system to having a much less robust immune system. We get less vaccine responsive. And I don't say that to be political. That's just based on the research. We are more likely to have more inflammation, as I mentioned, the autoimmune piece. And so this explains why the pandemic is a good example. We really looked at the data on who were the people that were most likely to have untoward effects from getting the virus, vaccinated or not. On paper, it is people that are in this menopausal transition or older that are more likely to be unable to mount an immune response. There's something called the thymus gland, which most of us have probably never heard of. It just becomes kind of a flabby blob of tissue. But the thymus gland is what over time is helping to kind of produce these thymus helper cells. And we get this flip-flop effect that happens in menopause. All of a sudden, like I mentioned, we have this much more reactive, more pro-inflammatory mediators, more likely to just overall not be able to fight off infections quite as effectively. And we're more likely to develop opportunistic infections. And sometimes the gut is the first place we will see those things. Like women will say, I have a dysbiotic gut. What does that mean? Someone told me, I did stool testing, and I'm like, I have yet to meet a middle-aged woman who does not have some degree of dysbiosis. And the way to think about dysbiosis or dysbiotic organisms is it's like having weeds in the garden. You plant fruits and vegetables, that's what belongs. And what grows up in between, because it's opportunistic, are these dysbiotic organisms. It's really a sign of this alteration in the terrain of our microbiome. And there's lots of things that we can do. I never want it to be the message that, immunosenescence happens and we just accept it. And, grandma gets sick so easily and is super frail. No. There's a lot that we can do to help offset these changes in the immune system, as well as the domino effect of everywhere else in the body.
Can you speak to the relationship between the hormone fluctuations and what's happening with the microbiome? Because this ties the perimenopause and menopause together with changes in the microbiome, because it is all these other things we're going to talk about too, but there's some specific things that are happening from a hormonal perspective.
Yeah, I would say, the first thing that I think about in particular, we were talking earlier about these very type A, very achievement-oriented women, helping them understand, like, as we have less circulating progesterone, we are become less stress resilient. We are more likely to deal with alterations in cortisol. And cortisol is not a bad hormone, but cortisol in particular can wreak havoc on the gut. And by that, I mean, if we are dealing with an acute situation, our cortisol goes up appropriately and comes back down. If we're dealing with a chronic issue over time, chronic cortisol elevation can lead to an elevation in glucose, which leads to an elevation in insulin, which leads to more alterations in the microbiome. We're more likely to deal with that leaky gut. We're more likely to deal with inflammation, that triggered immune response, which can impact our ability to fight infections, can deal with food sensitivities, can also deal with the loss of insulin sensitivity. So suddenly you're dealing with women who are, they're like, why is my blood sugar a problem? And that is multifactorial. That is not just this one thing. It's also understanding that, this estrogen piece is so important. There's something called the estrobolome. I'm not sure whoever named it that, but it is such a goofy name, but it's really talking about where in the microbiome our body is helping to break down and package up and get rid of estrogen. And so you can be estrogen dominant, as they like to use that term, and still have alterations in endogenous estrogen. So the estrogen our body makes, and estradiol is the predominant form our body makes prior to menopause. If you're in a body is not able to properly break it down, and estrogen detoxification really is in the liver. There's two phases, and then in the gut. If your gut's unhealthy, or if you have SNPs, genetic susceptibility, maybe you have detoxification issues. I'm thinking specifically about phase 2. If you can't package up that estrogen and get it out of the body, that can be problematic. A lot of women, phase 1, phase 2 work fine. They get to phase 1 and phase 2 in the liver are okay. Then it gets to the gut. And if they can't break down the estrogen, you can recirculate it. So it can magnify a lot of these estrogen dominant symptoms that women will experience. There's a key enzyme called beta glucuronidase, which is designed to kind of come through and clip the estrogen so you can package it up. Sometimes that is problematic. I think that, when I'm thinking about systematically how hormones are interacting with the gut, I think a lot about insulin and cortisol and glucose. I think a great deal about estrogen. I think about how progesterone modulates motility in the gut. A lot of women will tell me that because it's a smooth muscle relaxant, all of a sudden they just feel like they're not digesting their food quite as well. They feel like, they're having delayed gastric emptying without having things like gastroparesis, which you and I both know is super bad news. And the other piece is, I would say that testosterone in the research, really looking at how testosterone is oftentimes kind of coupled with things like PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. But not every woman that I see that has PCOS has high androgens in the body. But if we look at the microbiome research, women that have high androgens have alterations in the microbiome as well. So they're not processing the testosterone as effectively as they would in a non-PCOS microbiome, which we know at the basis of that is inflammation and insulin resistance as well. But those are some of the kind of key things that I think about in terms of hormones. Obviously, the health of our liver is critically important for breaking down and assimilating hormones. And this is not just you take a bottle of detox supplement over the counter and that fixes things. It really is lifestyle mediated, because that toxin bucket, we're exposed to toxins throughout our lifetime. Even if you live in a bubble, maybe not in a bubble, but you live a pretty healthy, pristine lifestyle, it's helping people understand that it's cumulative exposure over time, whether it's the fluoride in your toothpaste, the aluminum in your deodorant, it's the ultra processed food you're consuming, is over time. I oftentimes will find women at middle age suddenly start having greater issues with proper detoxification. And could we make the argument that yes, we breathe, we poop, we pee, we sweat. Yes, that's how your body detoxifies. But a lot of women in middle age need a bit more support to be able to effectively have things like a bowel movement. Like, it's not normal to be constipated.
Right.
I think people are shocked to hear that.